Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of CleanTechies, the podcast. I'm your host, Silas Maynor, and on today's episode, I talked with James Anthony Gordon Kahn of SkyBaron, a friend of mine who kind of helped me get into the CarbonTech space and learn a little bit about clean tech at large. He taught me a lot about CarbonTech specifically, and it was just a really interesting conversation with him today. He wasn't able to talk a ton about what his venture is at the moment, given that he's working with the University of Michigan and needs to keep some of the things confidential. But I think it was a relatively interesting conversation that should hopefully bring a lot of value to you. So I hope you enjoy today's episode of CleanTechies. All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast today with James Kahn. Thanks for joining us, James. How's it going?
It's going very good. Long day, a bit tired, but it's really good to be here, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really a pleasure to have you on. Obviously, wanted to have you on kind of as one of the initial guests as we got this thing launched. I owe it to you a little bit in helping me to learn a lot about this space initially. So I guess just for everybody listening, could you just give us a rough background about yourself and what you're doing?
Yeah, of course. So I am the founder of the company SkyBaron. I am also a Master's of the Arts candidate at Columbia University in Climate and Society, both of which go together very well, but it's a very busy time. Basically, I guess I should jump into how I got involved in the space first before I get to what we do at SkyBaron, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, that works.
All right, great. So as an undergrad, so we're talking back, 2015, I kind of stumbled in to the carbon capture space. I was studying international relations at the time in Boston, and we started to talk a bit about climate change as an international issue. And I said, well, let me really look into this. I had kind of stumbled into it before in like 2013, 2014, when the Arctic ice levels had reached their lowest. And I said, well, this sounds bad. Let me kind of learn more about it. And through this whole time, I started to learn about how really bad things could get. I started learning about the tundra thawing and just these tipping points. And I said, this is bad. Like, do I even want to finish my undergraduate career at the point, at the rate things are going? But this really led me to look into basically the question I had is, can we reverse this? If this is already a train rolling forward, what do we do to turn it around or back it up essentially? And the space was still pretty early at the time, but I did start to read about carbon capture. And beyond just what plants do and what trees do, this is literally about either preventing our emissions from entering the atmosphere of carbon dioxide or pulling it out of the air. And this fascinated me. I said, this is great. This isn't a silver bullet, but this is definitely a really crucial part of achieving what we have to do to basically save ourselves. So I started to poke around in the field. I reached out to people. I was very young. I'd like to think I still am, of course, but I was young and inexperienced in the space, but the space was still early. So people were very willing to kind of lend an ear, talk to me about this stuff. So I really got the benefit of getting a lot of early knowledge about what these technologies are, what they can do. And, long story short, I noticed that this is a very exciting space, but it's also very technical and very hard for people who probably aren't interested in it to really understand or get a grasp of, just because it takes a lot of time to get to know these technologies and these methods. So the space at the time was really focused on the big things like capturing our CO2 emissions and turning them into large volume materials like concrete, plastics, different materials, fuel, which is great. That's where the biggest impact is going to be, to actually fix our supply chains and make these materials that we use vast quantities of out of captured CO2. And B, it's where the money is. And, these companies need to make money. But I did notice at the time that what was missing was kind of the human connection and bringing this down to our level as individuals, right? So we're all going to, fuel our cars up and we're going to live in a house that's made with concrete, and that's great, but it'd be neat if we had products made with this stuff that we use every day. And anything from, vodka, which is being made, to toothbrushes, whatever, just everything we use, everything we touch, everything we see day to day is made from this stuff. And the space was starting to move in that direction. This was now, 2017, 2018, I think. There were a few products, Air Company, I think you'd have them on someday. They're great. Was starting to do, small quantities of their vodka, and there was kind of a conversation about bigger companies using these materials made with CO2 in their supply chains. So I got to keep this short. I know I've been rambling on about this. Basically, what we did, I partnered with a CarbonTech company out of Calgary that I like, and we were able to use their material in different supply chains in these small boutique brands in Taiwan and Texas that basically made concrete consumer products. So we were able to make, some watches, stuff like that. And that was really neat because that was one of the first consumer products that was on the market that actually had captured CO2 in it. So that was like a really cool storytelling device and definitely raised some interest. But we also realized at the time that it's hard to talk to people about this stuff and it's hard to figure out how to frame it. You can't talk about it as pollution because that might turn people off. Like I said, it's very highly technical. And it was very hard for, I think, some people to really like get the interest value in what this is.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a tough time. We learned a lot about how to tell the story, and basically, it brings me up. I know this story was a bit long, but it brings me up to where I am now, where we've made a pivot in what we're doing and how we feel like we can educate people. But that was a long-winded way of saying I got into it with very little experience and found my way, and now we're at a point where we really think we can make a big difference in the space and in the world.
Yeah, that's great. And no worries with the long answers. That's what we like to hear. So I want to maybe dig in a little bit, if you could tell a little bit more about the technology. So where is, to your knowledge, where is the technology in its life cycle? Has it been perfected at this point? I know obviously I mentioned I've spoken with some people from carbon upcycling, so I know a bit about the technology, but kind of as a broad market, like, is it pretty well perfected? What they can do with it, how they can prevent it from going in the air, as well as capturing it directly out of the air?
So that answer is also long. I'll try to shorten it. It really is all over the place. I've been very impressed with the speed of innovation in this space. I will say that. When I first got in, Klaus Lackner, I met him at Columbia, was literally in his lab with this material that was absorbing CO2 within like a terrarium, a very small scale, like literally just in the lab. And now, we have plants that are pilot projects capturing it from the air. We've perfected a lot of this stuff. We're using it in some products already. It's been moving very fast. So where is the space overall? I'd say it's still early, but it's on the verge of taking off. Half of that is because the attention it's getting. Elon Musk just partnered with the X Prize
Yeah.
to do the biggest prize ever, $100 million. And then just across the board, people are recognizing this, we need to do this. There are parts of the economy that we obviously, first and foremost, we have to start decarbonizing. We have to use less fossil fuels, but there are parts of the economy that we can't decarbonize easily. Cement production, steel production, aviation.
Yeah.
We're gonna need this for those things. So people recognize that. Really, it really is across the board. I'd say, in terms of capturing it from sources, so capturing CO2 directly from a smokestack, we're doing well. In terms of capturing from the air, just because that is more expensive, we're not there yet, but there are some neat partnerships taking place. And I will say some oil companies are looking into scaling this. I guess the best way I can answer this is expect within the next 5 years this to be a pretty common point of discussion,
Mhm.
and scaled up fairly significantly.
Yeah, I mean, it just sounds like, based off of kind of the market signals that I'm seeing from what I'm doing, there's a lot of companies that are finally realizing, yeah, we need to worry about this, because it's not just about making the environment a better place. For some of these companies now, they're at a point where if they don't do something about this, they're going to face loss of talent, because the average person realizes that climate change is real, and they're doing something about it. They'd rather not work for oil and gas people who are doing nothing to try to reduce their total carbon emissions. And I think that you made an interesting point about capturing carbon directly from the air. Some people wanted to say poo poo to it, given that it's like we need to first decarbonize what we're doing already. I just finished Tom Rand's book, The Case for Climate Capitalism, last week. And I think you mentioned that it was that there's always going to be, like you said, some things that are going to emit carbon. So we need to find a way to still create it and to capture it and bring it down. One thing I want to know is kind of, in your view, what do you see as the biggest hurdles to, I know you talked a little bit about it with the average consumer maybe not being hyper interested in these direct consumer products, but what do you see, maybe you could dig down into it a bit more, as the biggest hurdles for carbon tech, right? And maybe you can just divide it into consumer products as well as commercial uses.
Okay, great. Would you mind if I just touched upon something?
Yeah,
You
100%.
Yeah. So something I want to say about direct air capture is, I understand the people who, as you said, poo-poo it, right? I did for a while. And then I realized, there is no magic bullet. There's no one solution. Like, we're going to need all of these things for sure. We're going to need all of it. Even if direct air capture does, 1% or 5% of the work, whatever, it's needed. And it's exciting, So just putting that out there. So the biggest hurdles, I would say, that this space faces is what every new field runs into. It's attracting investment. It's figuring out which ideas are the best. It's figuring out which ones rise to the top, which ones have the best, ensuring those get support, scaling those up. Really, just how new it is, I think, is one of the main hurdles. I do also think a lack of information is still big. Elon Musk is raising awareness about it. Everybody in the space has done really great work. Air Company with their products, they present them in a very sexy, stylish way. Clean O2, awareness is rising, but it's not where it has to be. And, it's not, you can basically go up to someone on the street right now and talk about wind turbines or, solar panels, and they'll know what you're talking about. But as soon as you get into carbon capture, carbon tech, even these words, it's just like, what? I don't have time to listen to this right now. So that is across the board. My niche being consumer products, I'll say, the biggest hurdle right now, and just to clarify for your audience, when we talk about consumer products, we're talking about, taking captured CO2 emissions and making consumer products out of them, not large scale things like, cement and fuel, but the stuff we use. So it's using that carbon as a building block in our cell phone case, or just things we use to replace fossil fuels and stuff within our supply chains. But in the consumer product space, the biggest hurdles are, again, a lack of information, a lack of options. There's not that much out there yet. I think that will change within the next 4 to 5 years. We actually got reached out to by a massive Japanese company that wants to use CO2 in their supply chains to make clothing, but they're not ready. There will be a lot of options soon. We're not there yet. But the biggest problem I see facing the consumer space is the problem of greenwashing. And that's something that we want to try to combat with a new project. We're really at the point now where we actually can do good with these technologies. We can actually make a very big difference. And we want to make sure that, we don't have any bad actors essentially ruining the space by, there are so many good companies out there doing great work that actually is having a big impact. And I would worry that, if there are people out there watering it down, it could drag the whole space down and turn people off. So communication is a massive problem, awareness, lack of options right now, which will change over time, and the potential for people to write this off as greenwashing, especially if some companies try to do that. That's the consumer product hurdles I see.
Yeah. How do we prevent companies, large corporations, from getting to that point where they decide to greenwash, right? How is there ways that we can put in place? And again, I just kind of tossing this out there as an idea, maybe it's a policy issue, but what are some of the ways that that can be prevented from to actually get to the root of the issue rather than just kind of, again, greenwashing over?
Yeah, luckily, a lot of the frameworks to prevent that kind of thing already exist. They just have to be packaged and applied to the space. So we're talking really about, setting standards that people can understand and agree with, that's scientifically rigorous. Now, the project we're now working on at SkyBaron, I know this is a bit all over the place, but SkyBaron, we were trying to turn into a marketplace for products made with CO2. And we realized a few things over time: that A, that's easily replicable. B, all a big company like Amazon would have to do is add a carbon products tab to their website and we'd be out of business. And
Hmm.
then it doesn't actually do the best job, in my opinion, at showing consumers like, hey, these products are doing this and they're better than this because X. So, I can't say too much about the project we're working on. It's with U Michigan. But we're trying to essentially do hardcore scientific research into these products, figure out which ones are the best, and then explaining that in a very simple way to the general public.
So is that so that it's connecting the actual impact of each individual product, so that way people, like when they purchase it, they understand?
Sort of, yeah. I can't go into too much detail, but it's essentially guiding consumers on what's actually doing good, what's actually having an impact.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of caveats to it, and it's about storytelling, it's about presentation, and it's about simplification. Me talking about simplification, I've been rambling for the past 25 minutes, but um, the way to combat greenwashing really is to do two things. Number one, set up kind of a system of governance and frameworks to basically define like what makes a good product.
Hmm.
Um, we don't want this to become the Wild West, as exciting as that is with my bolo tie. We kind of need a sheriff to say, yeah, we need a sheriff to say, you know, here's what you should be aspiring to. Essentially, here's what's actually going to have a difference. Like if you're making a product that's made with, electricity powered by a coal generating power plant and it's plastic and you're going to throw it out, how much good are you really doing? But if you're capturing CO2 from the atmosphere with renewable energy and you're making something that people use, that's kind of what we want to do. So you should be rewarded for doing that good work. And there are all kinds of frameworks that, like I said, exist where you can actually make those decisions and tell people what's the best. And that would create kind of a pull for the space to say, here's what you should be doing. And if you're not, consumers might not like it. So it really is applying to this, the conscious consumer attention to the impact of what they have. And that's a fairly sizable chunk of the world now, thankfully. And if you
Hmm.
explain it in a simple way, you can create the pull for for companies to do good rather than just do.
Yeah,
And
that makes
that's
sense. That makes a lot of
essentially.
sense. Yeah. So I guess maybe one thing I am just generally curious about is what do you see as some of the biggest areas of growth, whether that's specific products? Because again, what my kind of gut feeling is based off what I've seen is that there's a lot of these clean tech solutions are actually, unlike the tech boom, they're actually tech based rather than team based, right? So it's like the technology has to be perfect. The technology has to actually solve something, and if necessary, you swap out the people running it. As unfortunate as that sounds, but what are some of the areas that you see for massive growth and just opportunity in the market? Because I think that a lot of people forget that, or that when they hear climate change, they think that that's going to put us all in economic turmoil. It's going to take away jobs, but it's not really the case, right? I think a lot of people need to realize that there's so much opportunity here. So, what are some of those areas of massive growth that you see coming?
With CarbonTech specifically.
Kind of in the clean tech space in general, but carbon tech, yeah, carbon tech
Okay,
specifically as well.
I'll start. Yeah, I'll start with CarbonTech. So honestly, just across the board, that's going to be an incredibly exciting space. That space is going to have massive growth, especially when it comes to building materials. Concrete, um, fuels are going to be big. Even consumer products. And I do have to say something. What I like so much about this, I'm going to geek out for a minute. So I love, if you look at a company like Air Company that's doing the vodka, right? what's neat about that is these technologies can really touch every facet of society, right? So their technology right now they're using to make vodka, for example. But that same technology can be used to make fuels. It can be used on Mars and space travel, all kinds of other stuff. So it's just so neat how if you're able, we learn a lot about the carbon cycle in my classes and all of this stuff. If you're able essentially to use these building blocks from nature instead of as a waste, but as something we can use to create everything that we need, you've I don't want to say you've cracked the code because you haven't. You have to do it right, but you've really stumbled into something where we are playing into what nature does of cycling and recycling carbon into our economy. And that's really what we have to do to get out of this mess. So CarbonTech across the board, but especially short term, concrete and fuel, I think are going to be the big areas of growth. In terms of, clean tech, offshore wind is going to be really big, especially in this country soon. Solar, obviously, I mean, just the basic things that are already big are going to continue to be big and get bigger. I'd say this is something that excites me, and I know it ruffles a lot of feathers, so I'm almost hesitant to talk about it. And I was turned off from it for a long time too, but modular nuclear reactors. So small scale nuclear power plants that, if done right, and if the waste is managed and recycled in a proper way, that's going to be a huge impact on the climate and our society, but also just in general as a business opportunity. Hydrogen, I think, is going to be fairly big in the next decade, and I'd love to see fusion take off. Fusion excites me. There's this big project in southern France called ITER, ITER. I don't remember what that stands for, and I just have to mention that because it's cool. It's not going to be an area of big growth anytime soon, but just putting it out there. So fusion, oh boy, essentially, so we have nuclear fission, which is nuclear power where we're splitting the atoms to create energy. Fusion is essentially doing what happens in the sun, where we're fusing atoms together to create energy. Wikipedia, everybody listening will do a much better job of explaining that than I did, but that is the basic principle, as far as I understand it, with my brain at 25% capacity right now. But the last area of high growth, before the internet decided to not let me say it, because I guess it's opposed to this, is alternative materials. Absolutely. So beyond just carbon capture, carbon tech, making materials out of CO2, it's using nature-based solutions like mycelium from mushrooms, different types of seaweed to make things. And I know this is CleanTechies, but I do consider that technology. I think we have to look to nature's technology. She's already done the R&D for this stuff. Using that to make materials, alternative materials, and opportunities to make a more circular economy. I think that will be one of the biggest things, because we use a lot of stuff. We should use less stuff, but we need to make that stuff out of better stuff. And I think
I think that's an interesting thing, because there's so many aspects and facets to creating a circular economy. We can't just snap our fingers. Like you said, there's not one bullet that solves everything, right? It's not just about climate change, right? Once we get to that point, then we're still going to have a long ways to go to really make this just kind of this recycling mindset, right? Of you using what we have and then turning it into different things. I think there's actually a company, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, that makes boxes out of seaweed, right? So shipping packages. But no, I think that's helpful. I appreciate the insight there. One thing I guess I'm just a little bit curious too is your thoughts on how do you think that the COVID pandemic has affected this fight against climate change? And are there any positive things that we can take away from it?
Wow, very good question. Okay. We were talking about this in a lot of my climate change courses, and although the pandemic really knocked down our CO2 emissions as a global society, they're already on the rise again, and frankly, it didn't do that much. Obviously, it didn't lower the concentrations in the atmosphere or anything like that. However, psychologically, I think it taught us a couple things. I think it taught us how fragile our whole global community and systems are, and we have to be mindful of that and protect it from all sorts of things, including climate change. I think it's taught us that we all need a lot less than we think we do. I'm a huge traveler, and I haven't been on a plane in, I think, over a year, about a year. And I still want to travel, and I do plan to once it's safe to, but I don't think I will as much. Um, I think it's allowed us as individuals. I hope we've all used this time well to kind of reflect on what we want to do and where maybe our skills are best put to use. Ideally, that's to help other people and the planet. So, I think one of the good things that came out of the COVID pandemic, silver linings, is it caused us to have a global point of self-reflection. I hope it lasts. I hope we take some of the lessons that we've learned from it and, implement them moving forward. And I hope we don't lose the mindset of we need a lot less than we think we do. And, a lot of the stuff we have to do is a collective effort. And I know that's difficult. We're all, wary. We want to go out and party. I do. But it's thinking long term.
Yeah.
So I hope it changed mindsets. I'll say that. I hope so.
No, I think that's a pretty good takeaway. I think that's good. It's definitely something I think, everybody listening certainly maybe think about that, right? For people who do want to make an impact, people who aren't just here to learn, but people who are really here to figure out how they can do something. I think that's good. A good takeaway is to realize, like, how much do I need to use? When can I be more mindful of what I'm using? Thinking about, I always think of the example my mom gave as growing up is like, don't complain about the food, right? Or eat your food, right? There's people in the world who are starving. So It's like remembering that we can all try to work together, right? Because this is not one person's fight, right? That's why I think it's funny. Well, maybe not necessarily funny, but kind of sad how some countries are like, oh, we're doing a good job at managing our carbon emissions. Why doesn't this other country do it? It's like, it doesn't matter. It's everybody's got to get on the boat. So that's helpful.
Can I just say one thing about that real quick? There's an amazing philosophy professor at Georgetown called Olufemi Taiwo. I hope I pronounced his name right. He and I are supposed to speak soon. He actually just did a piece in the Atlantic about the philosophy of carbon capture, the moral uphangings of it. And, sometimes we argue, like, whose responsibility is it to clean up this mess? Obviously, industrialized nations should do more, but let's stop arguing and just start doing it. Like, especially with CarbonTech, it's just like, should we really argue over like, oh, we don't want to rely too much on these things? Like, yeah, of course not, but we also have to start doing it. Like, action is key. You just have to start doing it and kind of figure it out as you go along. I just, to add that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And there's actually, like, it was mentioned in Tom Rand's book as well, that there's a huge economic upside, right? If you can get a significant share of the total portion of those new technologies, like, as a country, that's going to be very good for your economy too. So I think there's a lot of positive things there. I guess just to wrap things up, kind of my final thing that I want to ask you is for people looking to get into this space, into clean tech in general, what would you say are your kind of pieces of advice on how to do it, right? I'm in this boat right currently. There's obviously other people that are probably interested but have no idea where to start. I think that your example of how you kind of wedged your way and became a kind of a relatively well-known person in the CarbonTech space, what would your advice be to people listening to try to get into these new technologies? How would you do that if you were to go about it starting today?
I would first start from wherever I felt a pull, right? So I felt a pull, obviously, as someone wants to get involved in clean tech, they're going to feel a pull towards probably climate change. That's where it started with me. Then I did some research. So I say start with research. Figure out all the spaces in this space: CarbonTech, solar, wind, fusion, whatever, and figure out which one speaks to you and figure out which one you're the most interested in, because a lot of the learning you're going to have to do will be self-taught. So you're going to want to enjoy what you're reading about. Start with that. Then start looking for experts in the space that you're interested in. Try to be focused. Reach out to them. Just do it. Just start somewhere to talk about action. Take action. Reach out to those people. See if they're willing to meet up or just talk. It's easier now with Zoom being a preferred method of chatting with people. Then see if they know any opportunities that are there. If you feel so inclined, you can do what I did and go back to school. If that's an option, to really get a hardcore background in this stuff. And I'm talking to people who maybe don't have that background already. Honestly, it's so hard to give these answers because you just want to say go for it. You look back at your path or my path, whatever, and it's just like, how did I get to where I am now? I wouldn't be able to tell you. It's been meandering. There's been ups, there's been massive downs, huge setbacks, but I've learned that setbacks really just tell you what you have to do next. You've got to roll with the punches. Mm-hmm. Just do it. You got to find what you're passionate about, hone in on that, figure out more about it, reach out to experts, or even if they're not experts, people in the space, even someone who, installs solar panels, if you want to get into solar, just to talk about it. And then, a lot of the answers will appear to you as you do that. That's honestly the best advice I can give. Answers will appear. That my dad always says, luck lives at the crossroads of preparation and opportunity. If you're preparing by doing this research and getting involved and just starting, an opportunity will come along that you didn't know you were prepared for, and that's luck, and it'll happen.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. That's what I've seen for my career is as soon as you start to look for something, you eventually find the answer. So if you are whoever listening and is looking for what they want to do, definitely start taking action of some sort, and you'll start to get closer to the answers. So I guess, is there anything else that you wanted to close out with, any extra topics you wanted to talk about or things to close off?
Yeah, I will say just one more thing about the CarbonTech space. It's overwhelming. It really is. There's a lot to know. That's part of why we're doing what we're doing. There's a need for info. So, if you want to get involved in the space or learn more about it, you can reach out to me. I'd be happy to talk to you. I'm sure you can put my contact info in the description.
Yeah.
A lot of cool info out there, good organizations to look at, Carbon 180, Global CO2 Initiative, stuff like that. And it's going to be exciting. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of hard work, but I think we can all save the world together, Silas. I think it'll be good.
I think we can. Very good. Well, anyways, thanks so much for coming on, James. I really appreciate it. And we'll see you next time.
Absolutely. Talk to you later, my friend.
Hey guys, thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Clean Techies with James. I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I did creating this podcast. Obviously, a lot of interesting takeaways. Probably a lot of questions you may still have, so feel free to reach out. His contact information and his Twitter are below. Feel free to reach out to him that way, as well as through me. We can gladly get in touch to answer any questions you have. Maybe just have a discussion about the space in general. If you're looking to get more involved, again, please do remember to join the Slack channel that we've built. CleanTechies, the Slack channel, to just interact with people who are in the space, who are learning. Again, we're growing. It's slow, but lots of exciting things happening. And I also want to mention, of course, that again, today's episode is, as always, sponsored and made possible by Next Wave Partners. Next Wave Partners is a specialty boutique recruitment firm in the renewable energy and clean tech space. So if you have any specific needs, especially budding industries where there's not a lot of existing talent, Next Wave Partners can be a great resource for you. So again, thank you guys so much for joining today on today's episode, and we will see you next time on Clean Techies, the podcast.